tell us about the book.
So the book, yeah. So the main book, my main book is called The Moses Scroll, and it details the entire saga, the most controversial case in biblical history about Moses Wilhelm Shapira. And it covers from the time that the story begins, virtually at the very beginning of the story, when he comes to possess, and how does he come to possess this, what is called a curious manuscript written in Paleo-Hebrew letters.
Can I jump in here and give the 30-second version, and then you'll give the details?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so this guy named Moses Shapira, who is a Jew who immigrated to Israel in the 1800s from Poland. On the way, he converts to Christianity, opens up a store, becomes an international manuscript dealer. He brings this scroll eventually to the British Library, the British Museum at the time.
Yep.
He's going to sell it for, I think, £1 million or something. And it purports to be a scroll discovered in a cave near the Dead Sea. And you'll give more details on in Transjordan, the eastern side of the Jordan, Wadi Mujib, in Nahal el-Non. And it's proclaimed by one of the greatest scholars of the time, Christian David Ginsburg, who incidentally is also a Jew who converted to Christianity, to be a forgery. And Shapira slinks off across the channel, I want to say to Amsterdam or someplace like that, and commits suicide. And that's the story in a nutshell. And one of the main arguments is, well, this couldn't be authentic because scrolls couldn't possibly survive in Israel near the Dead Sea because there's too much rain and water. And then in 1947, they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and somebody says, uh-oh. And by the way, where are those scrolls that the British Museum never bought? And you're searching for those scrolls. All right. That's the 30-second version, 1-minute version. Now share some of the details on that.
And that is the version that has been known and repeated since 1883.
Okay.
But behind the scenes, there's a lot to the story. And so here it is, and you did it in 30 seconds. I don't know how long it'll take me. It takes me 200 and some odd pages.
Well, we don't have that much time.
But that's okay. I'm not going to read it to you. I'll tell it to you.
All right.
So in 1865, I'm going to take you back to 1865. The Ottomans are in control of what was then called Palestine. The Ottomans are trying to get a handle, Nehemia, on a group of people called the Bedouin. The Bedouin resist being put under this Ottoman rulership. But the Ottomans are trying to civilize the world. So they're trying to conscript the Bedouins to military service. They're trying to get taxes out of them. Anyway, there's this big push, and the Pasha is trying to really enforce this. So it describes that at a certain point, 2 or 3, the reports vary, several Bedouin are fleeing from their enemies. The enemies are the Bedouin, the Ottomans, and they find refuge in a cave high up in the Wadi Mujib in Nahal el-Non. They go into the cave. At the back of the cave, on a niche, is a scroll. Now this is not the real scroll, Nehemia, but I promise you, if I find it, I'll call you. This is a replica of one of the strips. Okay. All right. It's not quite to scale either, but it's kind of cool.
Is that bigger or is that smaller than
this is bigger? This is bigger.
Okay, that's important. We'll remember that later.
Yeah, but so basically the Bedouin, Shapira's not involved. The Bedouin discover what they hope it's treasure, Nehemia. They see a bundle, looks like old rags, and it's got some black sticky like bitumen or asphalt or something on it. So they go back and they rip it open and they find 16 blackened leather strips with some bizarre writing. They can't read the writing. So they throw them aside. They think this is trash. They hoped it was gold. It wasn't gold. But one of the Bedouin picks up these pieces and takes them back to his tent. Quick version of the story is he holds those in his possession for about a decade, and supposedly his life turns good. It's like a luck charm to him. He has lots of sheep, Nehemia, lots of women. You know, he's the talk of the Bedouin village. But one of the guys, one of the Arabs living in Jerusalem at the time, we know from historical sources, this guy's name is Erakat, and he's the Sheikh of Abu Dis. He happens to be the chief of the tribe who helps people in the time in the 19th century. If you wanted to travel to Transjordan, travel past Jericho safely, you had to go to Erakat. He hears through the wind of the desert about these scrolls. He knows his buddy Shapira is a scroll merchant. So he goes to his shop and he says, you might be interested in this. I heard this story. Shapira is very interested in it. And so Erakat arranges through an intermediary by the name of Salim to bring a sample of the scroll to the shop. So Shapira's away from his shop. He comes back to the shop. There is waiting on him one of the pieces, one of the 16 pieces. The long story is that over a period of about 5 weeks, meetings near on the road to Jericho, he meets with this intermediary, and at the last meeting, and he pays a little bit of money each time he meets him. Here's some money. He gives him more strips. By the end, the guy tells him this is all of it. Shapira, meanwhile, is transcribing this Paleo-Hebrew. So he's got, now remember, nothing in Paleo at this time, this is 1878, by the way. There's been no discovery of a leather manuscript that's written in Paleo, right? Nothing. So there's nothing to compare it to.
Now we can read Paleo-Hebrew even in the 1860s because it's essentially the Phoenician script.
Sure.
And there were Phoenician inscriptions that were discovered even in the Renaissance.
Lapidary inscriptions, yes.
Right.
Yeah,
and so usually they were like on sarcophagi and things like that, and they're written on stones. So okay,
that's right. Yeah.
So he's deciphering. Not to mention that scholars knew how to read Samaritan script, which is close enough to where you can figure out what. It's not exactly Paleo-Hebrew, but it's close enough to where you can figure out most of Paleo-Hebrew just from the Samaritan script. There's a famous story of a Nachmanides. When he came to Israel, he discovered a coin, and he couldn't read it, so he brought it to the Samaritans, and they were able to decipher, and it turns out it was from, I don't remember if it was in the Great Revolt or the Bar Kokhba Revolt. I want to say Bar Kokhba Revolt.
Wow.
And the Samaritans were able to decipher it. They actually got it a little bit wrong, but they could read it, basically. Okay, so Shapira is this Jewish immigrant from who's returned to Israel from Poland. He's converted to Christianity on the way, and he now has a shop in the old city. All that's accurate, right?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. That's correct.
And now he's got 16 pieces of a scroll from what is claimed to be Wadi Mujib, according to the story. Your book is a pun, is a play on words. The Moses scroll, it's the scroll. Am I right? It's the scroll of Moses Wilhelm Shapira. But it's also, according to Shapira, I think, and according to certainly some modern scholars, it is an early version of the book of Deuteronomy.
Correct.
That Deuteronomy is based on. Is that
correct?
Okay.
Correct. And so we can move into the scroll story, but to get the background, ultimately what happens is Shapira begins to look at these strips. They're not easy to read, Nehemia. He doesn't have modern technical tools. You and I were talking before the recording about all your cool gadgets. And
this would have been solved in a couple of hours with multispectral imaging.
Yeah.
I don't even think you would need multispectral imaging. You almost certainly, if they were authentic, could have done it with a camera. What you do is it's just a regular camera. You remove the IR sensor. Most cameras have an infrared, IR filter. Most cameras today have an IR filter that protects the sensor from infrared radiation, which can damage it. And so you remove that filter, and then you have some sources of light that you then take a photograph at 1050 nanometers, 1050 nanometers, and you should be able to read this like it was written yesterday, if it was what it claims to be. I want us to read that passage. You shared that with me. I don't know if we should say that. Let's do that. So you read to me the passage. You showed me a passage before the program where Shapira has written a letter to, I believe it's Hermann Strack in Germany, but he wrote it in English, which wasn't his native language because he was from Poland, and his English isn't so great. But there's a passage there where he's describing what he went through to decipher these scrolls, these really strips.
Okay.
We call them scrolls because they're only written on one side. Scrolls are usually rolled up. These were folded up, which is a bit unusual.
Yeah, well, there's something about that. Or you want to read that, and we'll talk about the fold. Whether it's
tell us about the fold first, because that's interesting.
Okay. So just to demonstrate, again, this isn't scale, but the way that when Shapira got these, he said that they were folded. I'll show your viewers so that the side with text is text to text, and the back, which is coated in like an asphalt or dark black sticky substance, is folded back to back, face to face, so that at no time do the letters touch the sticky backing. Now,
I see. If you roll it, it would touch. And by the way, there's natural bitumen in the area of the Dead Sea. It used to be called in Latin the mare asphaltum or something like that, the asphalt sea, because there were actually asphalt bergs floating on the top of the sea. I've seen remnants of that in the area of the Dead Sea. Most of them were mined in antiquity. So and when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the jars was covered with leather, if I remember correctly. No, I'm not sure it was covered in leather, but in any event, it was sealed with asphalt, and meaning with natural bitumen. And so that's entirely plausible today. At the time, maybe it wasn't. I don't know.
Yeah, this is the thing that really pulled me into the story, is that no one at the time had seen anything like this. So first of all, he's looking at 16 strips. He discerns through careful study, Nehemia, that it looks like this is two copies. In other words, the 16 broken pieces represent two copies of the same manuscript.
Okay.
Written in different hands, by the way.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. And so it's got a lot of peculiarities. Can I say that word? The first thing is it's written in a continuous script, with the exception of when you get to the 10 words. By the way, it has a version of the 10 words in the manuscript. Every word is separated by a dot, a word separating dot, an interpunct. Now, that no one had seen anything on leather in Paleo at the time, or in Phoenician characters, nor had they seen these word separating dots. They only knew that from lapidary. So here's what they said.
Well, they knew it from the Samaritan Torah.
Yeah.
Certainly by the 1860s, they knew that the Samaritans wrote in something that resembled Phoenician, and each word was separated by a dot.
Okay, now
you call it interpunct, a dot that's about mid-height of the letter.
By the way, just as a question for me, is every word in the Samaritan Pentateuch, in a Torah scroll, the Samaritan, is every word separated?
Not necessarily. If you have a phrase like, and in some manuscripts, if you have a phrase like, et haaretz, so et will be attached to haaretz as a single unit.
Well, let me tell you this. That's the way this is.
Okay.
So if you say lo tigno.
Well, that's also the case in the Siloam inscription. Have they discovered the Siloam inscription at this point yet?
No.
Oh,
we'll get to that. Okay. That's 1880. So we're 1868 Moabite stone, 1878 Shapira gets this manuscript. He decides it looks like Deuteronomy because it begins Ele hadevarim asher diber Moshe.
So it's third person. These are the words that Moses spoke. So he's third person in the
that's
in the title there too. Okay.
In two places, the beginning and the end.
Okay.
It looks like a scribal notation. Like at the end you have a colophon, and at the beginning you have this introduction. But it's only one sentence, and then it begins the manuscript. It's all first person after that.
By the way, another example, which is a modern example of writing in third person, is the autobiography of what was the general's name? He's the guy who like slapped the guy in the face. Patton. So Patton wrote an autobiography of himself. He took copious notes and had a diary because he believed he was going to be a great general. So he was keeping notes about what he was doing when he was in West Point, when he was a very junior, not even an officer.
Did he do any of it in first person or all of it?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a good question.
Yeah.
But most of it is in third person. And then Patton came upon the ruins of Carthage and knew he was at the site without being told of a great battle. Yeah, come on. The guy looked it up. We know how he knew that.
So
he studied the history. But
that's right. It's a good example.
Yeah.
So when Shapira starts reading this, he says, it seems like it's a very close, it's close in many ways to Deuteronomy, except that it's not exactly just Deuteronomy, and it has some significant variations. And it's lacking, for one piece, by the way, there's nothing of chapter 12 through 26. Nothing. Like if you charted what's in, what's out, 12 through 26 is not.